You were actually warned against taking the dean position at the Rotman School. And then you go on and you're there for 15 years. So why were you being warned? Question number one. And how did you know that it was still the right decision for you to take this job?
Well, I mean, I was warned that you're non-academic, they will never truly accept you, um, and that getting any progress would be like pulling teeth. But interestingly enough, there was one voice that actually kind of listened to it. My next younger brother's wife's father, late father, who was then the president of a university, and a really nice guy, Dr. Smith, and she had me, my sister-in-law had me speak to her, and he said, "Yep, being an academic administrator is tough. Don't fool yourself. It's tough for a president who's an academic. Like, he was a distinguished academic before becoming president, but it can be very important and very fulfilling." And so I thought, oh, okay, I respect President Smith, and so I'll always give him credit. He died of cancer, sadly, like about 15 years ago. But I will always give him posthumous credit for being the sensible voice that said, yeah, you think it's going to be easy? No. But if you want to make a difference, this is not a bad way, Roger.
And the make a difference piece, it's interesting because we've seen that you have said publicly that you're from rural Ontario, and taking on this role, this job, there was some element for you of public service.
Yes. In fact, I think of it as entirely public service. So I was raised with the idea that you should kind of do public service if you can. And I had enough of a success in my career to sort of be able to do that. And it was in my home province, because I do come from rural Ontario, so it's my home province, my home country, and I wouldn't have done it because of that. And knock on wood, thankfully, I ended up being relatively successful at it, and I would get recruited by all of these kind of universities to be the dean of their business school. And I remember when Stanford came calling, I said, no, I'm not even going to talk to the search committee. The provost calls me up afterwards and says, sort of like, "Are you nuts? You're Rotman. We're Stanford Graduate School of Business." And I said, "You've got the wrong view of me. You think I'm in the business school deaning business. I'm not. I'm in the public service business. And I know it's a great university and it's a great business school. I love that business school, and I love a whole bunch of the professors there, but it means nothing to me. There would be no motivation for doing that, but making sure Canada has one globally relevant business school is a quest for my home country and my home province." And so and he was like, click, like, this guy's a nut.
Or he got it. I mean, and it's interesting.
I think he did. I literally went to the like, "Do you not understand? We're Stanford."
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that you were, you had been successful as a consultant. And so this was an opportunity for you to take on a really meaty challenge, and it very much aligned with your why. Yes. Public service, your country. And so you put those two together. And then you had that very wise, balanced advice from Dr. Smith, and you said, "All right, here we go."
Can I say if you were interested in this, there's another angle too. So
would love to hear it.
Another now long deceased superstar academic, John Lintner, taught me an undergraduate course at Harvard College. And he was an economics professor there, but he was also a professor at the business school and ran the joint PhD in business economics, the same one that Mike Porter did. and my beloved protege, Jan Rivkin, among many others. So he was convinced that I must go and do the joint PhD program because I did well enough in his undergraduate course, and I applied because he said I had to, and I got in, and I turned him down and said I'm going to do the MBA program, and he said, "Oh, okay, but the first year of the MBA program and the first year of the joint PhD program are identical, so you could actually start into the program after year 2." And sure enough, I got sent. I got sent without applying and acceptance the second year, and I said, no, I'm going to continue my MBA, and then I got sent another acceptance without having applied for the following year, because he said, "Hey, you can still do this. You've only sort of wasted 1 year, which is the second year of the MBA program, which isn't required for the joint PhD program. You sort of only wasted a year." And I said, I've decided I'm going to go out and work. And he said, "Roger, this is a mistake. You were born to be an academic." I don't know why he thought that. "And you'll never come back." And then, sadly, he had a heart attack at the wheel of his car. And great man, he and Sharp created the capital asset pricing model. So, like, a really important financial economics professor died at the wheel of his car, and so I was sort of like, "Oh man, he's died," thinking, I'll never come back. So when I took the dean's job, in the back of my mind, in part, it was, I'm going to show John that no, all is not lost.
Right. He's probably academic after all, just not how he was envisioning. It's interesting how, those people that you admire and their aspirations are not even so much aspirations for you, but a vision of who you could be. It sounds like that was there somewhere in your.
It was like, he was absolutely here. One of the greatest, kind of business school professors of his era was saying, "Well, you have what I think it takes." Right. That, and Dr. Smith saying, you could do this, kind of were important influences. That I mean, the president of the University of Toronto, Rob Pritchard, was the guy who was pushing it and whatever, but he was had self-interest. He wanted to get a grade. But these were sort of completely independent. They had no horse in that race, but provided encouragement, and that I think was important.
And Roger, as you're saying that, it makes me think of how just having a person who believes in you and is very explicit about it and direct about it. And you actually, just a quick nod, I know this is completely digressing, but I have this sense that you've done that for Zeynep Ton, who does, good jobs. And, just the power of a person who says, "I believe in you. I see you doing this." And then it gets planted there. And I think it's just a reminder to us that when we see something in someone, that it's really important to say it and maybe even be intrepid about saying it.
Yes, no, I think so. And bless her, Zeynep is just such a star, such a lovely person, which I know you've become friends. But and you sometimes have to be a little bit pushy. Like in that case, it was, "Zeynep, you need to do this," and it was like, "No, really? Do I?" And I said, "Well," and she's smart, of course, super smart. But she said, "Well, I'll do it if you'll help me." And so, but yes, it was a push. And the push was to create the Good Jobs Institute to be able to help companies adopt this, because I knew from my Monitor experience that there had to be a Monitor company there to help companies who believed, when they read Mike Porter's competitive strategy, that, "Oh, this is great, this is great." That didn't mean they knew how to do it. And so my experience from that they need help. These companies who read your book will say, "Oh man, Zeynep is absolutely right. won't
How do
necessarily
I do
figure
it?
out how to do it themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So good. Okay, so here you are. You are now at Rotman, and what I want to do is this will be a little bit unusual in terms of a podcast. I want to have this almost be a case study, a master class of you talking through what you did, because I think it's so powerful. And so I want to know, you're on a brand new S curve, you're at the launch point. What is one of the first things that you did?
Well, I arrived on September 4th of 19, and the chair of faculty council, in which, for those of you who are not academics, usually faculties, departments, or schools like the school are run and sent by the entire faculty council. So the chair of faculty council came to me and said, I want to give you I want you to come to faculty council and give your vision for the school on the 11th. So 1 week. So I had 1 week notice, and I said, "Ooh, that's a bit of a setup, isn't it?" Because it was really. It was like, let's catch him with only a week, and he'll probably be too kind of shy, having not taken the time to create this and socialize it and whatever. So he'll probably do something kind of milquetoasty, and then we won't have to do anything other than what we want to do, which is, by and large, the default for most academics. So my first choice was to say, no, I'm going to give an extremely bold vision for what the school could be, even though it might not go over great. I am not going to be cowed by the fact that I only have a week. I'm going to say it like it is. And I said, we were at that point the fourth best business school in Southern Ontario. We were completely irrelevant. And the number one business school, the Ivy School, which characterizes itself as the Harvard of the North. It's the other Case Method Business School, was far and away number one, like so far and away number one. Anybody you'd have asked in the entire province, who's the number one business, or in Canada in general, who's the number one? Oh, it's Ivy by far. And so I said, goal is to make this Canada's only globally consequential business school. I don't actually care about our local ranking. That's not of relevance to me, or the relevance is the greatest business schools on the planet. We want to be counted among them. We're going to do that by being different. We're going to promote a view of business education as integrative thinking. The business education world has broken everything down into functional silos. That's not actually teaching people to be business people. It's teaching them to be mechanics, and we're going to do it differently. And I said a bunch of other things, but that was
Wow.
and it.
You threw it down.
And I got one of the most senior. Finance was what we were known most for. We were probably considered the best finance school in Southern Ontario. And the head of the finance area came to visit me afterwards and said, "Roger, this is a disaster. This is going to fail. You should have come in and said, we're going to win on the basis of having the best finance faculty. That's what we're good at. And I'm so disappointed. This is going to be a disaster." So did it anyway.
Auspicious start, but then you got to work, and you've actually shared with me, and I want to just go through some of these, some of the pillars of what you did.
Yeah, you made me do this. This is like me and Zainab Tan. You made me think about it, which I haven't. So there you go. If I do it, you do it to me too.
Okay, so the first thing was application of time, and I know you've written about this on Medium, and we'll share that article here. But you talked about removing 100 days from your schedule. So talk a little bit about what your thought process was from a time perspective as you went about transforming the school.
Yeah. And by the way, my beloved friend, and probably yours too, A.G. Lafley, and I are working on a HBR piece on this, because it turns out he was of the same kind of mindset as I was. So I have a view that leaders, any like consequential leader, is going to have more than 250 days worth of stuff on their schedule to begin with. And so if you actually want to focus on something other than what's already on your plate, the first step is not figuring out what you're going to focus on. It's figuring out what you're going to get off your plate to make space for doing the things that you think of as having the highest leverage. And so when I got to the Rotman School, I had a beloved dean's assistant, Catherine Davis, who had been the dean's assistant for maybe 4 previous deans. So she knew how deans spent their time. Plus, you have electronic calendars these days. And so I said, let's go and figure out what my predecessor, who'd only been there for a day, and my predecessor's predecessor, been there for longer, how they spent their time. Right. And what we figured out is among other things that they spent a day of their time on financial things, because deans sort of are the financial manager of the firm. So budgeting and planning and telling the provost we're on budget and blah 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 blah, and having meetings on this. So 50 days a year, essentially 50 days a year on faculty recruiting, sitting in on seminars to judge the new candidates for mainly assistant professor positions, although senior hires too. And I just said, can't do that. I'd like to get both of those down to 5. Now, how could I get that down to 5? These are both super important things. Nothing could be more important than your faculty quality. Nothing could be more important than having kind of the university give you the ability to operate. And if you don't do all the financial stuff right, they'll take that away from you. But it relates to the kind of the second point about this, which is a leader shouldn't line up the tasks and say, this is the absolutely most important task for the institution, therefore I do that because I'm the boss. Here's the next most important, I'll do that. Next most, okay, now I'm done. Now all the rest of the tasks that aren't as important, other people can do because they're not great me. And that's the wrong, in my view, and HE's view, by the way, is absolutely the wrong approach. It should be old-fashioned David Ricardo. As you may recall, David Ricardo, the father of comparative advantage, right? Who said, he said a nation should manufacture and export the things that they have a comparative advantage in. They may not be the absolute best, but they have a comparative kind of advantage in it, and they should import the things that they're not very, very good at. So I said, do I have comparative advantage over the brilliant Peter Pauli, who was the great German, by way of Penn, kind of star economics professor we had, business economics professor he had? No, he's like, he was as old as I was and had spent his entire time on kind of life in a faculty on faculty issues. We were not hiring the way I believed we should hire. And so he and I had to have a sort of what I call the Vulcan mind meld on agreeing on what our approach would be to faculty. But then I didn't show up at the meetings duplicating his effort by saying, oh, that person made an interesting point in that seminar. And you probably know that game, Whitney. You have to they come in and give a job talk, and then you have a seminar afterwards, and then blah, blah, blah. And then you do this for 20 people for one position. It's enormously time consuming. That's how a dean could spend a day a week. And I got it down to 5. We ended up with, well, by the time I left, the 3rd ranked faculty in the entire business world after Harvard and Wharton, with me spending 5 days a year max. In fact, I probably toward the end was below that, rather than 50 days. So there,
Wow.
35.
Wow.
Mary Ellen Yeomans, our chief administrative officer, brilliant woman. She was only at University of Toronto because her husband was a star psych professor over in arts and sciences, Columbia grad. She had just smart as heck, and underutilized in my view, right? But she knew more about the intricate workings of University of Finance than I would ever know. In part because she had a stint at Simcoe Hall, which is the University of Toronto kind of headquarters. So she knew everybody at Simcoe Hall, how they looked at finances, and she knew how the Rotman School and any other department or division looked at it. Was I going to figure out all of that arcane stuff as her? Well, maybe if I spent years at it. But no, she was great. But we wanted to completely change the way we were managed financially, like completely and utterly, which terrified her a little bit.
Mhm.
But we had the Vulcan mind meld, and I invested disproportionately in the first 6 months or so, right? In that, I probably spent more than a day a week for the first 6 months of my time on that. But then for the remaining 14 and a half years, I spent 5 days or less. And she at first thought, it's because you don't care, Roger. And I said, I don't, it's not that I don't care, Mary Ellen. And anytime you want to come to me with anything important, my door will always, you are so top of the list, but you are and can continue to be better than I'll ever be, kind of at this. And we
Mhm.
transformed the way the Rotman School managed its finances. They created a separate system for us, where we took way more responsibility and got less university protection. And the subsequent president of the university saw it working so well that he converted the entire university to our system.
Wow. Wow.
And
Wow.
so super important was am I responsible for that?
Mhm.
Well, in a certain degree, by pushing it. But Mary Ellen Yeomans, bless her,
Mhm. Mhm.
was almost, like she was. I was 20% and she was 80%.
Mhm.
And like,
Mhm.
and that was great for her. Like at university-wide CAO meetings, I think Mary Ellen would like stride
Mhm.
in and everybody would say, why can't I do stuff like she does? Like because she was the coolest the
Right.
coolest kid on the block, right? She was
Yeah.
doing the coolest stuff. So it was good for her. Her salary during the time I was there doubled, which is unheard of in the university, because she was just taking on way more responsibility. And the university saw, oh man, is she making a difference? But that only became the case because I didn't pick the most important things to spend my time on.
Mhm.
I picked the
Mhm.
things where I had comparative advantage. I had comparative advantage in seeing the outside world and knowing what the business world wanted. I had
Mhm.
comparative advantage in being able to write stuff for a business audience, right? That would bring essentially intellectual glory to the
Mhm.
Rotman school, because I was the dean, and the dean was doing this stuff that the external world saw, and
Mhm.
so and others were not equipped to do that. So I filled in and did the things where I had substantial comparative advantage
Yeah.
and didn't spend time on super important things where I didn't have comparative
Wow.
advantage. And I think every
Oh,
leader should do that. And the clients I work with, I say, take out your
you're
calendar and get rid of 24 days, 2 days a month, where you
mhm.
do not have demonstrable comparative advantage, right?
So
Uh,
powerful.
yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing that some things that 2 days a month, take it out, demonstrable comparative advantage. And as I'm listening to you, there are some other things that are coming up, which is it takes confidence to do that,
Yes.
because if you're not confident, you want to have the most important job.
Yes. Yes.
So there's
And
sort of
control. You want to
exactly,
seize
exactly.
control.
There's that undergirding ability to say, I'm great at this, you're great at that, and we are going to play where we are best suited. So that's the first thing. The second thing, though, that I think I'm really pulling from this is the Vulcan mind meld that you said. Sure, Mary Ellen was going to go do that. And what was the name of the other man that you mentioned?
Peter Polly.
Peter. Okay, so Peter and Mary Ann, they were going to both go do that. But it was important that you took the time to transmit to them your vision, so that when they were doing their work, they had on the lens that you wanted them to have, so that they could do the work through that lens. And that takes a lot of discipline and willingness to take the time and patience
Yes.
to convey what it is that you want.
No, yeah, I mean, as per usual, you're coming on to exactly the precise point, I think, which is
Mhm.
that. And I had to overinvest early on to make
Mhm.
sure that we had those conversations. And I couldn't, like, this is something too where you can't order somebody to believe something. Like, especially like Peter was an established chair, senior faculty member, just sort of saying, hire people a different way. Good luck, Roger. It was to talk to Peter about what we were trying to accomplish together, what we needed. And on that front, right, in the academic world, right, if you're recruiting a junior professor and you see two candidates and one has 5 journal articles already in journal qualities of X, and one has 4 in journals of quality X, but the one that's 4 hates students, hates teaching, and is incredibly miserable the one that's 5 hates students and is miserable to work with. And the one that's 4 loves students, is a fabulous teacher, is just wonderful to work with, is a wonderful colleague. The academic world will pick the one with 5 every day of the week.
The one with 4. Wait, you're saying the academic world will pick the 5 one, and you're like, no,
even though they're a complete jerk. Like, even though they're a complete jerk and will not contribute in any way but that one dimension, because they sort of say, well, research is what we do. And I said to Peter, listen, if it's 5 versus 2, okay, right? Although I'd keep searching for somebody who's got both. But on things that are close to a tie, we're going to care deeply, deeply about the kind of culture that we want to create in the professoriate. And the culture we want to create is collaborators who aren't these solo, it's all about me, I don't care about anybody else, I'll fight with them if I want. We just have to have a different culture, because my thesis was happy professors are going to be more productive, and professors that are fighting with one another. And there had been all sorts of infighting before. I was warned when I got there, there's like massive infighting, and faculty council is a zoo, and blah, 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 blah. And I said, no, we have to have this place where people love to be here and they love to work with their colleagues and the like. And so we talked about it enough, and Peter was like, yeah, no, you're probably caricaturing our searches a little bit, but there's more than a bit of truth to what you're saying. And a little bit, and sure enough, we hired over 120 professors, tenure stream professors during my time there. It was like a huge ramp up, and I would say that we only hired 4 jerks, right? Which is a very low kind of number.
Did you know they were jerks when you hired them, or they just presented not as jerks?
Right. They dissimulated extremely well in interviews, and I think I wasn't in them, but I think Peter was so at one of them. He was so annoyed, but it's an incredibly low ratio, and we had almost no regretted departures in the professoriate during my entire time there, like about 2 or 3, which is insanely low. Why? Because everybody liked being there, liked working together, because we had made that choice to care about that. And did it stop us from being great? No. We went from not relevant in the world of research to in the FT rankings of research of faculty, where they rank them quantitatively on faculty, number 3. Number 3 ahead of Sloan, Chicago, Stanford. Like, if anybody would have said that's going to happen, they would have just said, you are smoking some serious dope. There is not a chance in the world that could possibly ever happen. No.
All right. That's amazing. And so one of the things I think is a great thing to tease out for a minute, because you kind of alluded to this, is how you interacted with people. There are 2 things that I would love for you to share. One is when people would come to you and complain, and you said there was a lot of infighting when you arrived, and this idea of people being the process working, people working together and being productive. You talked about having meetings, these one-on-one conversations with people. So can you tell those 2 stories? Because I think that is very much some of the secret sauce of these outcomes.
Yeah, yeah, and I like the direction you're going because it involves the reinvestment. So what do you do with those 100 days? One thing I reinvested it in is overcoming what I thought was an insanity when I got there, which was the way the University of Toronto works and most universities work, which is that at the end of near the end of the each professor has to submit a annual form, an annual activity report is what they were called at the University of Toronto. Here's what research I did. Here's what teaching I did. Here's the other service I did, committees I served on, and then the dean issues them a one-page letter that says how they rated on those things.
Oof.
And that gives them their overall rating. And I'm like, you people have been telling me that the professors are your most important assets, and we pay them the most. The biggest chunk of the
Like they are.
cost structure, is for professors, and that's it. That's your HR development system, a one-page letter, which is mainly a form letter with three numbers on it, like from 1 to 7 on research, from 1 to 7 on teaching, and 1 to 7 on service, and then an average of those. The rest is actually a form letter. Thank you, Whitney, for.
Wow,
So you got to be
how
kidding me.
dehumanizing.
And so I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to reinvest some of those time that I've saved in meeting one-on-one with each professor. Now, that was a little easier when we had 36 full-time tenure stream professors, because that's what I started with. But it took, an hour or two of prep for each one of them. So, so it kind of, and then an hour with them. And I just would ask them, what were you trying to accomplish? Did you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish? Yes or no? And if, yeah, what are you going to try and accomplish this year? And are you set up to accomplish that, or is there something that would be helpful that the school could do to set you up better to accomplish that? And then the second year, I could ask, last year you said you were going to try and accomplish this. Did you accomplish this? Did you get what you needed to set up? That's all I did. And some of them were like epic, right? Which is, we had a accounting professor. She was a what is it called, a teaching stream person, and so they unfortunately have lower social status, and we have at University of Toronto 3 campuses, one right downtown and one in the east and one in the west. And she said, well, there is one thing that would really make a change in my life, because this was probably 19. She said, it would be really nice to have a laptop, because I go out to University of Toronto, Mississauga. I have to take all my discs with me to plug them into the computer, because that was before you had this fantastic, kind of cloud database system where it would show up there. So she said, it would be so much easier if I could just plug my laptop in and I didn't have to make discs of everything and whatever. It would be great. And I said, well, why don't you have a laptop? And she said, oh, the school policy is you can have only one desktop computer for your office. And I just said, Joan, you can have a laptop. And so, and she goes to IT to get a laptop, and they phone me up and say, have we changed policy? I said, no, but this was really important to Joan. If it's really important to other people, we'll figure that out as we go, but it's really important to Joan. What do you think Joan's attitude toward me, the school administration, toward students, and was thereafter? It was just like, I made a reasonable ask and they did it.
Yeah.
It's no exaggeration to say she loved me. And the extreme high cost of that move.
Yeah.
Right.
$2,000.
$4,000 maybe at the time.
At most.
At most.
Yeah. Wow.
And so those meetings, what those meetings did was give me a human connection with all of them. And I got to learn about their research more than I would have otherwise, so that I could promote them on the outside and say, when I'm out talking to somebody, we've got somebody who does really cool work on that. I could hook you up with with them. I could talk about it in speeches, which would get back to them, and they'd be all happy. So it had all these knock-on effects.
Mm-hmm.
Now the problem is we got up to 120 full-time tenure stream professors. All the adjuncts and sessionals and whatever insisted on doing it too, and that was another probably 75 of them. So I ended up having to do 8 weeks of this a year. 8 weeks, right? A non-trivial amount, but I'd saved 100, right?
Right.
And I
100,
actually
100
saved more than
days. 100 days. Yeah, but
100 days, and so I gave back 40 of them to something that was enormously valuable, and I attribute our insanely low regretted turnover in professors in part to that, because they had a relationship with their dean. And you'd say, come on, shouldn't you have that? Well, no, that there was no time for that in the dean's busy schedule. Yes, there was. If you got rid of all this other stuff that other people could do well, nobody could do that. And the funniest thing is, like, we had relationships with engineering and economics, those faculty of arts and sciences and School of Engineering, because we had a joint program. And I would get calls from the professors there saying, "Can I do the one-on-ones with you too?" I'm like, "No, I can't do the whole year. There are 5,000 professors in the University of Toronto. I cannot do."
President of the university.
Yes.
Wow. You okay, so you have a quote, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'm going to see if you remember it. It has the word crucible, it has conversation, and it has one-on-one in it. Do you remember what your quote is?
No, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's sort of like, I'm sure it was something to the effect of I'm
going to find it.
There's nothing that can substitute for having that kind of a conversation.
Here we go. Culture changes. Yeah, I got it. Culture changes in the crucible of one-on-one conversations.
Yes. Oof. No, it does, and that relates to another thing. So I'm into sort of corny things too, with me. So promise you won't laugh. But I had oh no, I had a what I called the campaign for adult behavior.
Say more.
So, well, there was all of this like infighting. There had been a scandal before I got there that had toppled the previous dean, that resulted in kind of a couple of factions. One was on the old dean's side, who got toppled. One was the people who forced his toppling, and blah blah blah. They were at each other's throats, and I was told this is a cesspool of intrigue and whatever. And so I said, well, that's not going to be helpful to us being great, and so we gotta fix that. And so I'm going to have the campaign for adult behavior. And so what I did is, whenever somebody would come into my office to complain about somebody else, right, I would somewhat theatrically say, so if you, Whitney, and you're complaining about Sally, I'd say, "I hear you, Whitney," and I'd get up and go, Catherine, can you get Sally on the phone, because Whitney and I are going to come talk to her right now. The Whitney in this picture would say, "Well, that's not what I want. What I wanted was to be able to unload on Sally behind her back, so that she could not defend herself, so that you would then side with me and slap Sally." Right? So I destroyed all the fun in that and games in that, and the Whitney in this story would grab me and Catherine, no, that's okay, you can work it out. And after half a dozen of those, nobody came to me, because they couldn't get what they wanted, and what they wanted was a one-sided chance to slam somebody behind their back without them being able to defend themselves. But it sent the message, that's not how we're going to act. That's not adult behavior. And we had a campaign for adult behavior.
Oh, so good.
You laughed, but at least you liked it.
No, I actually liked it a lot. So here's the question. We're going to have a side talk for a minute, or sidebar. I definitely want to talk about experimentation. I
Yeah.
definitely want to get to fundraising. You've got a number of other things in here, and I don't know. Do you have your list up in front of you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So which of these are you like, Whitney, we've got to talk about these? What are and we can go over if you want. I mean, we had till
Sure.
10:15. We can go. Okay.
No, no,
So
I've got more time.
you're
I've
good.
got more
Okay.
time,
All right.
and so
So let's do
I think it would be. I think the doctrine of relentless utility would be fun too, and not a
let's
bad
do it.
way to
Let's
go
go there.
after goofy things. So
Okay.
let's do that. But then I think fundraising I think would be great. There's a good story, the Gary
Mhm.
story. Which
Okay.
why don't I just quickly tell you it so that you know what's coming. So Gary we had maybe 4 world class professors when I got there. The other
Mhm.
36, the 32 were just locally okay.
Yeah.
He would publish in the top journals. He's actually the co-father of the whole field of goal setting.
Wow.
But anyway, he comes to my office within the first couple of months saying, and his writing partner is at USC. He's got an offer from USC, which at that time was a way better business school than us.
Mhm.
Not anymore, but it was. And it's in Southern California, and it was a 30% higher salary, so 80 grand. And what I did was, so I didn't have 80 grand to spend, right? And so I the quick and dirty of the story is I said, Gary, I can pay you $80,000, but then I won't be able to do a bunch of other things that I plan to do, or I can pay you the $80,000 in 5 years. I'll ramp your salary up to 80,000, so it's what the USA
Mhm.
salary is, but you have to wait 5 years. But if you make me pay you 80,000, we're going to turn around the school. It's going to be awesome. And I'm going to have a list in my head. It's only in my head. We'll never share it with anybody else, ever. I promise you this. But there's going to be a list of the people who made my job harder. And if you ask me for the 80,000 now, you'll be on that list and you can't get off that list because you made my job harder. And if you wait for 5 years, you'll be on the list of the people who made my job easier. And so, Gary, I will respect you. You go away and you do whichever you want.
Wow.
Totally okay. Comes back 5 years later and say, I want to be on the good list.
He
So he
comes up
gave up.
5 years
A
later.
$250,000. He gave up to be on a list in one person's head that would never be shared with anybody.
Wow. Okay. Do you want
So
to tell the
you
story?
have resources. You have
Yeah.
resources that you
Okay.
don't think
All
you
right.
have. And
Okay.
the resource is respect and affection. So we got to tell that
Mm.
story because
Oh
it's
yeah,
just
yeah,
such
that's
a
a
cool.
great that's a great story. So let's go
People
to
will remember
yeah.
relentless utility.
Yeah. So
You
let's
can
see.
say, "Do you have it? Did you have any other corny
Yeah.
expressions, Roger?"
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think from a flow standpoint. So we've got this resources, we've got the experimentation. Yeah, let's do this one next, and then we'll go to experimentation. Okay. So what other stories do you have around, you talked about professors, that time with them one-on-one, helping them feel seen and cared for. But what else did you do in order to faculty? What kinds of conversations did you have?
Well, like my campaign for adult behavior, I had another thing called the doctrine of relentless utility.
Because you are an
I would
economist after all.
yes, exactly. That's right. I was trained as an economist.
Mhm.
Don't hold it against me, Whitney. So what I just told my folks is all I want you to do is focus on being relentlessly useful to the audience you serve, and don't worry about making deals to get something back. If you're relentlessly useful, good things will happen.
Hmm.
So, for example, media relations. We had a kid. He was in his 20s, named Ken McGuffin. Was our entire media relations department, and we were nowhere on media relations. We were like nothing. Ivy had and Queens and Schulich all had greater connections. And I just said, Ken, you've got 2 audiences. You're a 2-sided market. You're a matchmaker in a 2-sided market. On one side are reporters and producers for typically for video, and reporters for print, and professors. And business reporters will often need a quote from a knowledgeable source, or they'll need to get somebody on to speak on a topic. And professors if you handle it well, will get some, fun, enjoyment, prestige out of being quoted or
Mhm.
on TV. So just be relentlessly useful to both. Understand what the producers and the reporters want and need, and give it to them, right? Give it to them. And the professors make it super easy. They don't like doing this often because it's a pain in the ass. They aren't briefed well. The reporter is kind of annoying because it hasn't been prepped well. Make it super easy for them. So just be relentlessly useful. Don't ask anything, any deal. I'll get you this if you just relentless utility. And Ken went off and did it. And he figured out that I don't know, reporters, when they're on deadline, need somebody not in the next 2 weeks. They need somebody in the next 2 hours. You would know this, I'm sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
When the reporter calls you, if you say, I could talk to you next Tuesday, they'll say thanks a lot, but that's after the war.
Right.
And so relentless utility. He was relentlessly useful to the professors, and we measured. There was a service that measured our share of earned media among business schools. Within 5 years, we'd gone from nothing to 60% share of voice. So the other approximately 40 business schools shared 40 share points, and
Wow.
we got 60 share points. The competition, the FTC should have investigated us for monopoly. But it was
Wow.
all the doctrine. And people would call me and say, Roger, kind of like, who's the PR firm that you use, because we'd like to hire them. We have no PR firm. We never in 15 years hired a PR firm. Well, then at least tell us how you structure your media relations department. I'm like, that's easy. Ken. And then the people who knew Ken, they said, like the guy who's like 30, bicycles to work in shorts, that's yes. Now Ken is now globally known in the business school business. He speaks at conferences and everything because
Mhm.
he's the superstar of that. I mean,
Relentlessly useful.
he's relentlessly useful. And so that's
Mm.
what I just said. I said, don't worry about what's your exact precise job description, how you're going to be measured, all of those things. They'll take care of themselves if you're relentlessly useful. And I think that became the mantra for people, and it got them always thinking, how can you tell whether you're being useful if you don't know who your customer is or what
Mhm.
value you're trying to provide? Right. It enforced, I think, a lot of discipline and thinking about that. And I got people started. I said, Ken, here's the way I think about it, and I think it was helpful for him to get started. But he took it to
Right.
another level. He's just so good at his job now. As I say, he's famous in the business school
Yeah.
business, and in fact, in university business generally.
Mhm.
He'll get asked to speak at conferences of
Yeah. He's
university
became an
external
expert. Yeah.
relations.
So you
Yeah.
did a little Vulcan mind meld with him, and then he
Yes.
went off
Yes.
to race.
Yes. The
Yeah.
theme comes back,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. Okay. So, on this idea though of resources, what about with professors? Any stories with professors about finding, bartering, finding resources where if it's not financial, what other resources might you have available to you?
Sure. And this, for what it's worth, Whitney, was a super important question, because our revenues when I got there were $13 million a year, and we had 14 million of expenses. So we were running a deficit, which in universities is extremely bad. So I
Mm-hmm.
entered a situation where we did not have any resources, which
Mm-hmm.
is one of the reasons, back to the previous story, why unearned media was so important. We had no resources to advertise, and so we had to get it. So the part of the story is figuring out how to get resources when you don't seem to have it. So we got better advertising for free than all the other business schools combined
Mm-hmm.
without paying a dime for it.
Yeah. Talk about a high
High ROI.
ROI employee, right?
Yes.
Wow.
No kidding. No kidding.
Wow.
So yeah, so Ken probably got us, I don't know, $5-10 million of unearned
Mhm.
media
Mhm.
a year for a salary of
Yeah.
probably when he started 60, not anymore because he's a superstar now. But so I had a situation where I had to do this again with a professor. So when I started, we only had a handful of professors who would be genuinely world class, i.e., they could publish in the world leading journals. And we had kind of one who came to I will call him Bob to protect his identity, although it's a super positive story. But so Bob comes to my office. He's one of the four that would be the most painful to lose, and says, "Listen," and he was not cocky about it. He said, "Listen, I'm sorry to say this, Roger, but I just got an offer from a great U.S. business school with better weather than us, where his writing partner happens to be the guy he became famous kind of writing with, and it's essentially it's $80,000 a year higher salary, like a big number higher."
Oh, an $80,000 bump.
Bump, an
Oh,
$80,000 bump.
bump.
Um,
Okay.
and so I sit down and say, "Okay, Bob. So here's the scoop. You are like a uh, precious resource for us.
Mhm.
You're one of our finest, and you're one of the finest in the field. We don't have many like you. We're going to get a whole bunch more over time." Um, uh, and what that requires is for me to transform the economics of the school, which I did. By the time
Mhm.
I left, we were at 130 million, so we were 10x, and so we could afford lots more.
And what
Lots
were your
more.
expenses? What were your expenses? So you
Oh,
went from
well,
13.
we probably, this is it is probably close to 130. Like in business schools, everybody thinks they make a lot of money. They don't. You just spend it back on
Oh,
being great.
got it. But your
Uh,
revenue was 130, so you 10 extra revenue.
yes,
Okay, keep
10x,
going back to Bob.
10x. But so Bob, so I said, you know, right now we have a huge economic problem. We can't pay world-class salaries for world-class professors. We pay kind of sort of Canadian level salaries because most of our professors aren't world-class. You are, but we don't have the economics to do it. I'm going to create the economics for doing it. But here's the situation: if you make me pay 80 more thousand for you today, that's gonna make it harder for me to do everything else I'm doing. If instead you'd be willing to wait 5 years, and I promise you absolutely positively you will make actually more than that. We could pay more than that because they're not actually a super duper top tier school. We want to pay like the top 10 schools. I promise you I will get you there, but I need the time to transform the business. So you have a choice. I can give you the money now, or I can give you the money and more in 5 years. And you can go away and choose. But here's something you need to know, which is I'm keeping a list in my head. It's in my head only. I will never release, kind of reveal it to anybody, and I haven't. It's now 10 years since, or 11 years since I was dean. I haven't. On one is going to be a list of the people who made my job harder. So we're going to succeed, and it's going to be spectacular. But I'm going to have a list of people who made my job harder. And if you need to have the 80,000 now, you'll be on that list, and you can't get off that list because you made my job harder. So it's a choice of what list to be on. The other list is the list of people who made my job easier, and I will always feel about them that they helped the great transformation that we're going through. And I recall we are a really crappy business school at the time, and people I'm not sure are thinking that we're going to be as great as we ended up being. But
Yeah,
anyway,
it was a bold statement.
that's a bold statement.
Mhm.
And so I said, Bob,
Yeah,
go away.
he'll edit
And
that out.
yeah, I'd let that out.
Okay.
Um,
So you said Bob.
Bob, go away and think about it, and just come back to me when you're ready. And you're either you get the 80,000 on this list, wait for
Mhm.
the 80,000, and you're on that list. And I really didn't know for sure what to make of it. I thought he'd say, "Wow, that's like 400 grand price to pay to be on a secret list that nobody other than the dean is ever going to know." Sure enough, it comes back 5 years later and says, "Roger, I want to be on the good
Mhm.
list." So instead of paying I showed him affection and respect, right? I said, "You will get my respect and the affection of warm feelings about me." So as a leader, never think that you've got no chips that you can play. You just got to
Yeah.
figure out what the chips are, and based on your context, that chip may well not be money. Right? If I were the dean of Harvard Business School, I'd say,
Yeah.
boom, 80,000, no
Yeah.
problem. We've got it
Yeah.
empty. Well, that's their context, and so they should do it, and they do it. They make
Right.
sure that nobody's going to leave them for
For
money.
money.
That was
Yeah.
not our context, and I just didn't kind of have the money, and so earned media, love and
Yeah.
affection. These are all chips that can be played.
Yeah, and what's interesting about it is that what I appreciate is because, if you think about, forgiveness, right? We think about like the idea of
Mhm.
forgiveness, but what's important about this is unless you are a saint, and maybe even if you're a saint, you would want to say, I won't remember, but you will.
Yes,
And a
yes,
willingness to say, you know what, I will remember, and I'll want to treat you the same, but I won't be able to, because I will remember that when we were trying to build this, you weren't here. And I will remember that when we were trying to build this, you were here. And that's going to feel really good for both of us. It's really
yeah,
powerful.
yeah.
Mm,
And he
mm,
talks about it. So I mean,
he
I'm
does.
supposed to give it, but he does because we did make a fantastic transformation.
Mm,
We are
mm,
Canada's only consequential global
mm.
business school. He's still, part of the faculty, and
Still there. Mm,
he will say kind of my buddy when referring to me, right?
wow.
Uh, right, and so he feels the sense of having been on a great adventure
Mm, mm.
from darkness to light for the school, and he was a part of it, and
And he
so
trusted you. He trusted you because, right, you were making a very bold statement. So inherent in that also was, don't say something that you don't absolutely 100% believe that you can stand behind. I mean, there
yes,
was still risk
yes,
in your being able to do this, but you believed that you could.
yes,
Um,
yes.
mm,
Yep, I had
okay.
what I thought of as a plan where I could pay him
Mhm.
the money. But you're right. You're right. It would. I mean, the worst possible thing to do would have been 5 years later to say I tried but I couldn't, and then he would say,
Sorry.
"Well, you're a jerk, right? You promised me
Yeah,
something,
exactly.
and I made a
Yeah.
decision, and so I for sure had to deliver."
You kind of had that sort of money in the bank from we can deliver this.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to talk about experiments. Before we do that, though, is there
Yes.
anything else that you really want to have on the record in terms of, because we're going to do experiments, we're going to talk about fundraising, and then start to wrap up. Is there anything else in here
That's
you're like,
good.
oh,
That's good,
okay,
Whitney.
you're
I'm
good.
in your
Okay,
hands. You do a great
okay,
job of this
great.
podcast. That's why people listen to
Oh,
it.
okay, so let's go to experiment. So one of the things I've heard you say that I am fascinated by is that you actually never, other than that bold statement on September 11th, 1998, you never said sweeping transformation. You just started doing experiments, and yet there was sweeping transformation. So one of the things I would love to do is hear about your philosophy around the experiments, and then talk us through 3 or 4 experiments that you did over the course of your tenure, and what those looked like, and then what happened.
Sure. Um, so yeah, I have often joked that said I never did anything for 15 years. I just ran experiments, and the
Mhm.
reason is again contextual, and what I would say to anybody listening to the podcast, kind of remember, I had a context, and don't try to do things. If you say, oh, well, Roger's got some cool ideas, don't try to do exactly what I did, because your context will be different. So you've got to adapt it for your context. My context is the academic world, where getting a change through the governance process is lengthy and painful. So if I were gonna make a curricular change, it would have to go to the curriculum committee and back and forth, and then finally they would take it to the executive committee to see whether it's ready for the faculty council, and then back and forth. Then it would go to faculty council and get sent back to the executive committee, which would send it back to the curriculum committee, and big. And the reason is not stupid, right? It's really hard to kill things in an academic institution. Possession is way more than 9/10 of the law in an academic institution. And so they recognize that officially adding something new, doing something new, means it's probably there forever, unless somebody has got the intestinal fortitude to take it through the 3 or 4 or 5 years worth of work back and forth that's frustrating as heck. So that's my context. So I see that context and say, well, am I going to do that? Kind of no. And so rather than saying I'd like to do this, which I almost never said, I just said I would like to run an experiment. And most people, and again, it's sort of good in the academic world, they're for running experiments. They run experiments all the time in their own business. So it's a metaphor that is meaningful to them. Oh, we'll just run an experiment. And then once I got them to say, yeah, go ahead, run an experiment, because they've not made anything kind of permanent, then I would work like a demon to make sure the experiment succeeded. Like it wouldn't be in some sense an unbiased experiment. I would put my finger on the scale of just making work and effort to do it. So I'll give you an example. So I always believed that we could create all sorts of benefits by taking the second term of second year. So second year is all electives, 5 in the fall, 5 in the spring. Some schools are 4 and 4 and 6 and 6, but we were 5 and 5. In the spring is when they're doing all their recruiting, and so 5 courses can be kind of onerous. They're missing classes some for that period. Wouldn't it be great if we would just push the second term of second year back 2 weeks to start in the middle of January, and for the first 2 weeks after the winter break, instead of starting right after New Year's, you'd put a 2-week intensive into it, where you could take a course essentially all day long for 2 weeks. The benefits would be, one, you could knock off one of your 5 credits. One, that's good. So then during the recruiting season, you have 4 rather than 5. You have a little more space to do those things. 2, it opens up possibilities for kinds of courses that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. A travel course. You can't travel when you've got 1 class a week for 13 weeks, which is what it was, 1 2-hour class a week for 13 weeks. That's 26 hours of class time. You can put 26 hours in 2 weeks. And if you want to do the class in Silicon Valley or New York or Guadalajara, you could actually do that. The professor and the students could go and do that. And additionally, 1/7 of the world's tenure stream business school faculty at any given time are on leave, right? They're on their sabbatical, because everybody gets a sabbatical once every 7 years. It's hard to convince a professor to say, take your sabbatical and come to University of Toronto Rotman School for a whole year or even a semester. But saying, you can come for 2 weeks, we'll pay you really nicely for it, and just teach for 2 weeks. We'll put you up. You don't have to worry about anything. Like if you're going on sabbatical, you got to find a place to live and all that. No. We'll put you up in a hotel, treat you like a king or queen. You teach a course, and you're out of there, and you go to whatever other sabbatical thing you want to do. Okay, so lots of
reasons to do it.
Lots of reasons to do it. I also had a view of it could help us with lifelong learning, and have people who graduate, allow them into those courses to pick up courses to they can do more easily by taking a couple of weeks off and doing it. Anyway, so I say, can we do this experiment? Whole bunch of the professors are, that'll never work. The only way to learn is by it seeping in slowly over the 13 weeks. Having this compressed won't work. Blah 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 blah. And so I don't have to fight it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I say you might be right, and the experiment may prove that you are absolutely right. And then they're like, yeah, he's right. Like I know what the experiment is gonna do. It's gonna fail miserably, and so this is no biggie.
Mm-hmm.
I start teaching in mid-January. I ain't teaching one of those compressed courses. No way. So they're fine. They're totally fine. I have no real meaningful
Resistance.
opposition,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then I go, and so they say, yeah. So Roger, go ahead and do your stupid ass thing. And so then I go to some of the best professors and say, the ones that I've been meeting with, and say, please, pretty please, and we'll give you a extra stipend to create because you're going to have to create a little bit different field. We'll give you greater teaching support to help you with the grading and whatever. And please, pretty please, do it. I got a number of professors to do it. They ended up loving it because they also discharge part of their teaching load, right? So they have less to do in the rest. They quick. Students adored it.
Yeah, the
right?
intensity. Yeah.
Right. And so after that, I just say to the faculty, can I keep running the experiment? And they're like, okay, sure. The ones that thought it was a complete failure, it would be a complete failure, or I guess it worked. And some of them said, maybe I should try that too, and did it. And then after about, I don't know how many years it actually was, 3 or 4 years, I said, shouldn't we just sort of like formalize this? And they're like, yeah, like, of course, it's working great. And, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And it just go through like curriculum, because it's like, duh, like, do I have stupid written on my forehead? This is working great. And of course we should ratify it. So that was my tactic for everything. I never went to create a fight that I had to win. I just said, let me try it.
Yeah.
Let me try it.
Yeah.
And then I was like the swan, right? Paddling underneath the surface vigorously to make sure it worked. And
all right, so let me do this. I'm going to ask the question again so that you only need to do one example because I said 3 or 4.
Yes,
so Roger, can you give us an example of you talk a lot about experiments. What did that look like, and can you tell us a story around that? Okay, good. So now Alex has that. Okay, perfect. Let's talk about fundraising.
Yes,
because that's a big job of a dean. You reduced the number of days that you were doing it, and yet you were highly successful. So what was your philosophy around that?
Yeah, so this is one of the, like, I don't want to sound disrespectful to the academic world, because there's a whole bunch of things that are really sensible, but there's some things that I just do not know where people get these ideas. And fundraising is absolutely one of them, Whitney, which is the approach to fundraising. Because I got sat down and we're like, you're an outsider, you don't really know about fundraising. Here's what you do: we have to create lists of rich people. And then what we do is we like phone them up and badger them into having a meeting where then you go, Roger, and you ask them for money. And I'm like, I actually, just because of, the business I've been in and the world I've been in, I kind of know a lot of rich people. And that's not how they work. That's not how they work. Getting badgered for a meeting with somebody they don't want to meet with, whose only purpose for having that meeting, the only thing they care about at all, is getting their money. But then they said, but no, that's the way it works, Roger, and that's why you have to have so many of these. The hit rate is really low. And I was like, right. It's sort of like direct mail, right? The hit rate is like 4 of 1%. And so I just say, I'm not doing it. Here's my belief. My belief is that it's 100% about worthiness. We are not now worthy. 4th best business school in Southern Ontario with nothing that it stands for. We're not worthy. We are going to make this place worthy, big time worthy on a whole bunch of fronts. We're going to go from 2 events a year that outsiders are invited into more than 2 a week. We are going to be the place that they come for IP. We're going to be on TV and in the print media because we've got kind of ideas. We're going to work tirelessly on making this place worthy. And so people ask me, how much time did you spend? Because they all think Dean spent all their time on fundraising, in part because of the stupidity of fundraising. And I say, I can give you 2 answers. One answer is 100% of my time. And it's a truthful answer because I spent 15 years making Rotman School worthy, full stop. So 100 is a completely honest answer. I can also give you another honest answer, which is about 5%, because I spent about 2 hours a week talking to rich people about their money and giving it to us. So I said, we're just going to focus on worthiness, and we're going to get people with money, right, involved in the school, right? So we had this super fantastic conference on Canadian competitiveness. And this guy who just sold his investment management firm, who I knew was interested in competitiveness issues, and we had a speaker who was awesome, Dan Treffler, professor, was Rotman professor, awesome, gave it this awesome talk about childhood education and its impact on competitiveness. And he and his wife, this guy who sold his investment management firm, he and his wife were really interested in that. And they came up to me after the conference and said, Dan Treffler, I noticed he was not introduced with a chair. It was professor of economics, not the blah, blah, blah
distinguished chair.
Distinguished chair of this. My wife and I would love to see him do more of that work here. And if we gave you $2 million, would you give him a chair?
I think we can do that.
I think we can make that work, right? It's like, so how long did that take me? It was 10, 15-minute conversation, right? And I had asked our people to invite him because I had gotten to know him and knew he was interested in the subject. Did I think it was going to be a $2 million kind of conference? No, it was what? Doctrine of relentless utility. We were going to be relentlessly useful, and good things were going to happen in ways that we may or may not have expected. I had got this one of the Canada's billionaire real estate developers who was chagrined at the fact that there's very little real estate, or very few real estate courses in business schools. And we did, and we had one, but it was more the theory of it. It wasn't sort of the practical side of it. And he actually came to visit me and said, why doesn't the Rotman School do more of this? You're at downtown Toronto. Toronto's a good real estate town.
Yeah.
So I said, well, would you be willing to teach a course? I'd provide all sorts of help and guidance, and for you, would you teach a course? And he said, yes, Roger, I would, but you have to make me a solemn promise. You will never ask me for money. Because billionaires are always worried about that. Oh my God, I'm going to do this, and then they're going to ask me for money. I said, Scout's honor.
Solemn promise. No,
I promised. But then we had a project to build you've been there, the new building we presented there, and the new building. It's a $120 million building. This guy is a billionaire real estate developer. So I asked him, would you be willing to serve on the selection committee to select the architects? And he's like, sure. And he had all sorts of all sorts of questions that nobody else was asking, and it was like grilling people because he knew development and building buildings, and that was all great, and then he just gives me a call and so says, Roger, that new building, that's going to be pretty expensive, huh? Yeah. You probably need a lead donor. How about if I give you $15 million? And I said, I promised I would never ask you for money. He said, you didn't. I offered. Doctrine of relentless utility and also treat people the way they want to be treated.
Yeah.
Not as a piggy bank.
Yeah, exactly. When
treat them as a real person. Help them out.
Exactly. I felt myself very moved by that because Yeah, when you are a person with resources, and financial can be very obvious, but any kind of resources, there is that continual feeling for someone that they are being used.
Yeah.
And so when you were willing and able to treat him with respect, then he could offer something, but it was a gift that was freely given. It's really
Yes.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Really beautiful.
So we ended up raising, and it's chump change, like from my alma,
Mhm.
alma mater. I think Harvard raises this in every couple of weeks. But we raised $250 million while I was dean, which was more than any other business school
Yeah.
by a long shot,
Mm.
by essentially rejecting the methodology. I just, like, in 15 years, I did very few sort of cold cally, I'm gonna come and visit you and ask you for money, kind of things.
Right.
And one way to be relentlessly useful is to make Joe Rotman School. So it's called the Rotman School because a entrepreneur named Joe Rotman gave $15 million. He gave $3 million first to name a building, then $15 million, so $18 million to name it as school. And immediately it had this big scandal and was all over the paper as the faculty of mismanagement and all of this stuff. So that's what he got for his $18 million.
Wow.
I
Mm.
kind of helped turn it into something really special where everybody would say he one of those moments, and it's sentimental to me because he passed away now, which is sad, but he was driving down the street that the school is on, and with his grandchild, and we have big Rotman banners down it, and the kid apparently says to him, "Grandpa, there's our name up there," because he's the kid's name is Rotman, surname is Rotman too. Grandpa, there's banners with our names on that, and he said it made him cry, Joe cry, because he could say, yeah, that's our school.
Yeah, we did that.
And so he calls me up, kind of out of the blue 6 or 7 years later, saying, how I gave $18 million to the school to name it and set it on this path, fulfilled my greatest dreams for the school, and our family would like to give you another 18.
Wow.
Again, didn't ask for that. Didn't ask for the 15. Didn't ask for the 2. Why did we get them? Worthiness.
Yeah.
We were worthy, and we were relentlessly useful. I was relentlessly useful to Joe, to what he wanted to be as a philanthropist, what it meant to him to have the business school there. And he increasingly got all these other kind of philanthropists coming to him and saying, "Joe, how did you do that Rotman School thing? I mean, you must be so happy." And he's like, "Well, as a matter of fact, right? Like, it's useful for him, and he deserved it." Like, I'm saying that, but like, he deserved it. He couldn't have been a better donor. He would always give me good advice. Oh, I miss him. He's fantastic man. But
so good. All right. So a couple of final questions.
Yes.
If we look at your 15-year tenure as an S-curve, how long were you on the launch point? When did you know you'd hit the sweet spot? And when did you know you were in mastery and needed to go on and do something else?
Good questions, and a not awesome answer to your last one. But so I think it took me 3 or 4 years of really steep learning, and then it was,
you got into the sweet spot. So it took a while.
Got into the sweet spot, and I kind of knew what to do.
Okay.
Mainly things worked the way they were supposed to. Many of the seeds that were planted on the early part of the S curve were flowering, and so it made it easy. And then, you know what, Whitney, like, you should have written your book before you wrote your book. Come on, because I think I stayed too long. If I look back on it, I would say I posted for the last 3 years without, because it was sort of tricky. You're only supposed to have 2 terms. 7 and 5, and it's in the University of Toronto Act, which is an Act of Ontario provision that says under extraordinary circumstances you can get a third term. And so I was the longest serving dean of any faculty in University of Toronto history. I got this extra term of 3 years, and they was like, "You can't go. You're so important." Blah 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 blah. And they're, I shouldn't say blah 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 because they were genuine, but I should have known that I was going to coast because there's not much I could do in 3 years because that was the end, no chance whatsoever. But I stayed because people begged me to and said it would be good for the school. It wasn't good for me. I should have gotten on to my next thing. And if you would have written your book in 2010, Whitney, I might have not stayed those 3 years.
It is interesting.
Bad girl.
Yeah, it is interesting how, so basically 3 years at the launch point, 9 years in the sweet spot, but then you got to mastery and probably were in mastery that last, probably mastery years 11, 12, maybe 10, and it was time to go. And but we don't know, and I think it's very difficult to be able to say, you know, I know you're saying that you want me to stay, but the right decision is to go now, and to be able to have the language to do that. It's tough, especially when people are saying,
and this is where, and I know you do a lot of this, Whitney, of coaching people, but like, I think if you would have been my coach in 2000, let's say from 2008 on 10 years, if I would have said, "Hey, Whitney, come coach me," I bet you would have talked me out of accepting a third term. You would have said, you know, yes, all of their arguments for the school and the university are right, but they're not right for you.
And because it's not right for you, it's not right for you because companies don't disrupt, people do. It's not right for the university ultimately.
In the end, they may think it's right for them, but it's not.
Okay, lighter note. You're a big fan of the New England Patriots. Bill Belichick is gone. How would you approach fixing their organizational issues in this transitional period? And what would you do if they reached out to you and said, "We want you"? Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, no, that would be fun. Yeah, I think it's, I mean, it may sound platitudinous to say, but I think they have to make sure they pick things that they really, really want to maintain, right? About that era, which is the most successful era in the history of the sport, and be quite explicit and say, we want to keep these things, and say, here are the things we're going to change, not because we disagreed with the way he did it, because you can't, because it's the best track record in the history, but we don't think we can replicate that. This is a new context, and so we think we can. These things are important, and these things are going to change, and stick with that formulation.
That's really powerful.
Don't leave it like ambiguous as to which is which, because then people will say, "Well, you're disparaging the previous coach." No, we're not really. Well, yeah, it's because you leave too much to interpretation.
And that's powerful. Of like, okay, here's what we know we're going to keep, so that legacy, that foundation, and here's the part that we're not going to keep. And what I loved about that reframing is, maybe there's some stuff that didn't work because he's not perfect, but there's also that piece that you just said, which is really powerful. We're not going to keep it because it's not going to be Bill Belichick and we can't replicate it. So we need to evolve. Yes. That's really powerful. That's an important reframing. Okay.
And Whitney, the replaying that is really personal for me. It's something I've had to come to terms with in my career, right? Which is,
say more.
Well, I have some special qualities that when I disappear from whatever scene it is, are not going to be there. And so I've assumed they would be. And I've had many life now disappointments at watching organizations that I have left not be able to continue the path that I've had the organization on, and I've been more disappointed than I realize I should be. I should just be expecting that and maybe setting the stage for it. In the academic world, you can't do that because the
Yeah.
dean isn't involved at all in the selection of the next dean, so you can't do anything. But in some of the other things I've done, the super chagrining thing for me is a regression to the mean that I didn't expect,
Mm.
but I know why it happened, and it's because I'm not saying I'm awesome by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm special, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
there's
Mhm.
special, just like you are
You've got
special.
your own
There's
sauce, your way of
yeah,
doing things,
there's
and your way
things
of
that
doing
you
it.
are particularly good at,
Yeah.
and assuming that if you're particularly good at something, that will automatically persist is
Mhm.
foolish.
Yeah,
You've
it's
gotten me all
I
introspective now
know,
with me.
it's interesting. I wanna stay with this just a little bit longer because I think there's something really important about this is because one of the things I hear you saying is, like, there's sadness, like, you put all this work into something,
Yes,
and you think that you've created structures and processes. I mean, this is what you do. So there's an element of sadness of realizing things just they're going to change, and no matter how hard you try to put a process in place, it's going to change. And
it's going
so
to.
I think that's one thing I hear you saying, this element of sadness. But the other piece, which I think is quite lovely, is to recognize, when you said, that you're special, like everybody's special. Like
Yes,
everybody is contributing something to an organization. I mean, if they're contributing, and
yeah,
when they leave, that spark isn't there anymore. And
that's correct.
and it's just the way it is. And
It's just
so
the way it is. Yeah.
why what you said was so powerful is to say we can't replicate it and we shouldn't try to. So we need to know there are a few things here that we must hold on to, but we have to just understand that the rest of it needs to, must, and will change.
Yes.
And
Um,
you're making me think of a wonderful quote from Angela Blanchard, who I had her in Smart Growth. She said, "At every milestone, there's both grief and gratitude,"
yeah. Oh, that's good. That's
which is what you
good.
just described.
Yes.
Grief
Yes.
and gratitude.
Yep. I
Mm,
have a whole lot of gratitude, which I've said to various people at the Rotman School, but I have grief as
you
well.
have grief, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, Roger, what's been useful to you in this conversation as we wrap up?
Oh man, everything. You're the best, Whitney.
Mm,
This is why when you said let's do this,
mhm,
I say it. What's useful is to have a super empathetic and super smart person with a body of knowledge behind this
mm,
the smartness probe my
mm,
thinking because it brings out things I would not have necessarily thought of, and that's why
mm,
you're as good
mm,
as you are at
mm,
doing this kind of podcast.
mm. Thank you. Thank you. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners as we wrap?
Um, Dale Carnegie,
Mhm,
the making friends and whatever and influencing people guy had an
mhm.
important piece of advice. He said, "Never give another person a speech." And he said, by which he meant sort of like if I was your executive assistant and you were like a senator or something, and you were going up to the podium to give a speech, you trip, you fell, you knock yourself out. I should not take your speech and give it because you can't ever give somebody else's speech. He said it would be better if, even though I'm a lowly EA, that I would create a speech
Your
that
own one.
was my own, and that would be my message you do not try to be somebody else. When somebody says this is the way things are done around here, take it under advisement.
Mhm,
Don't be foolish and say I'm going to ignore it completely. Take it under advisement because you need to give your own speech. You need to forge your own way, and that would be the single most important piece of
mm.
advice I could give that I think hopefully listening back on this, a person would say, no, that's what Roger infused in what he did at the Rotman School.
Mm. Mm. Thank you.
You are most welcome. Thank you.